Tycoon left his wife, finds her raising twins and living a lavish life as his mistress. The door opened softly, and Emma walked in. Her grace and poise were palpable, even as tension filled the air between them. "You wanted to see me, Blake?" Emma's voice was steady, but there was a hint of apprehension in her eyes. Blake turned to face her, his expression a mask of determination. "Emma, we need to talk. I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I want a divorce." The words hung heavy in the air. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the muted hum of the city below. "A divorce," Emma repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But why? After 10 years? Blake's jaw clenched. "We've grown apart, Emma. You've become complacent. While I've been building this empire, you've been content to just exist in its shadow. I need someone who can match my ambition, who understands the drive it takes to succeed in this world." Emma's face paled, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the back of a nearby chair. "I see," she said, her voice hollow. "Is there someone else?" Blake hesitated, guilt flashing across his features before he schooled them back into neutrality. "That's not the point. The point is, we want different things. I've already spoken to my lawyers. They'll be in touch with you about the details." Emma stood there, stunned, as the weight of his words settled over her. She felt as if the floor had suddenly disappeared beneath her feet, leaving her in free fall. But even as her world crumbled around her, a small, determined spark flickered to life in her chest. "If that's what you want, Blake," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word, "then I won't stand in your way." As Emma turned to leave, Blake couldn't help but notice the set of her shoulders, the lift of her chin. For a fleeting moment he felt a twinge of doubt, but he quickly pushed it aside, turning back to the view of the city he'd conquered. Little did Blake know, as Emma walked out of his office and out of his life, that this was not an ending, but the beginning of a story that would shake the very foundations of the empire he'd built. The day of their final divorce hearing arrived, crisp and clear. The San Francisco County Courthouse loomed before them, its imposing architecture a stark reminder of the gravity of the moment. Emma and Blake sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, an ocean of polished wood and unspoken words between them. As the judge read out the terms of their settlement, Blake couldn't help but glance at Emma. He expected to see her crumbling, defeated. Instead, he was met with a serene expression that sent an inexplicable chill down his spine. "Mrs. Anderson," the judge addressed Emma, "do you understand and agree to the terms as they have been presented?" Emma's voice rang out clear and steady. "I do, Your Honor." Blake's brow furrowed. Where was the emotion, the pain he had anticipated? As they stood to leave, he caught Emma's eye. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "I hope you know this is for the best, for both of us." Emma looked at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Oh, I know it is, Blake. More than you can imagine." There was something in her tone, a hint of what? Amusement? Confidence? Blake couldn't quite place it, but it left him unsettled. As Emma turned to leave the courtroom, her lawyer leaned in and whispered, "Mrs. Anderson, are you sure you don't want to contest any of this? The prenup limits your claim significantly." Emma's smile widened, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Trust me, counselor. I have everything I need." She walked out of the courthouse, her head held high, leaving Blake to stare after her, a nagging feeling of uncertainty growing in the pit of his stomach. Little did he know, Emma's calm demeanor wasn't a sign of acceptance, but the quiet before a storm that would soon engulf his carefully constructed world. As the heavy doors closed behind her, Emma stepped into the bright California sunshine, feeling the warmth on her face like a promise of things to come. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "It's done," she said simply. "Time to move to phase 2. The person on the other end chuckled. "Excellent. Let the games begin." Emma ended the call, a smile spreading across her face. The chess pieces were set, and she was ready to play the game of her life. Blake Anderson had no idea what was coming, and by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late. She found herself once again in the grand lecture hall, her heart racing as she locked eyes with a young, ambitious Blake Anderson. His boyish grin and tousled hair a stark contrast to the polished CEO he would become. "Excuse me?" Blake's voice echoed in her memory. "Is this seat taken?" Emma smiled, feeling the flutter in her chest as if it were happening all over again. "No, it's free. I'm Emma, by the way." "Blake," he replied, his eyes sparkling with a mix of confidence and curiosity. "I couldn't help but notice your brilliant analysis in last week's case study. Have you considered applying for the summer internship at Tech Venture?" The conversation flowed effortlessly, their shared passion for business and technology creating an instant connection. As the lecture ended, Blake leaned in, his voice low and intimate. "Listen, Emma, I have this idea for a startup. It's crazy, but I think it could change everything. Would you want to grab coffee and talk about it?" Emma felt the electricity of that moment, the potential of what they could become together. "I'd love to, Blake. I have a feeling this is the start of something big." The memory faded, leaving Emma standing outside her sleek downtown apartment. She leaned against the cool glass of the window, her reflection overlaying the city skyline. The youthful optimism of that day seemed so distant now, replaced by a steely determination. "Oh, Blake," she whispered to herself, "you have no idea how right you were. This is indeed the start of something big." She pulled out her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she logged into a secure server. The screen filled with financial reports, market analyses, and a web of connections that would make even the most seasoned corporate spies envious. A notification popped up. Project Phoenix, Phase 2 initiated. Emma's lips curled into a smile that held secrets and promises. The bright-eyed Stanford student was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to play the game better than anyone could have imagined. "You wanted ambition, Blake?" she murmured, her voice laced with a mix of hurt and resolve. "Well, be careful what you wish for." As the city lights twinkled below, Emma raised a glass of champagne to her reflection. The real game was just beginning, and she was holding all the cards. The question wasn't if she would win, but how spectacular her victory would be. She closed her eyes, transported back to the cramped garage in Palo Alto where it all began. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and determination as Blake paced back and forth, his energy infectious. "Emma, we're on the verge of something revolutionary here." Blake's voice echoed in her memory, his eyes alight with passion. "This algorithm could change the face of data processing as we know it." Emma looked up from her laptop, a mix of admiration and concern on her face. "It's brilliant, Blake, but we're running out of funds. How are we going to keep the lights on?" Blake's grin widened as he knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "That's where you come in, my brilliant strategist. I need you to work your magic with the investors. You have a way of making them believe like no one else." The scene shifted, and suddenly they were standing in a plush boardroom, surrounded by skeptical faces. Emma's heart raced as she delivered the pitch that would change their lives forever. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves, "what Blake and I are proposing isn't just a new product. It's a new way of thinking about data, a revolution in how businesses operate." As the investors leaned in, captivated, Blake squeezed her hand under the table, a silent acknowledgement of their partnership. The memories flashed forward, each success building on the last. Late nights in the office, champagne toasts as they secured bigger deals, the rush of seeing their company's name in headlines. Through it all, Emma was there, always in the background, always supporting, always thinking 3 steps ahead. The reverie shattered as Emma's eyes snapped open, her reflection in the computer screen a stark reminder of the present. The woman staring back at her was no longer the wide-eyed supporter, but a force to be reckoned with. "You built your empire on my strategies, Blake," she whispered, her voice a mix of pride and determination. "Now, let's see how well it stands without them." With a decisive click, Emma initiated a series of transactions that would send ripples through the tech world. As the confirmation emails flooded in, A smile played on her lips. "Check," she murmured, imagining the chessboard of corporate power shifting before her eyes. Across town, in his penthouse office, Blake's phone began to buzz incessantly. Unaware of the storm brewing, he ignored it, focusing instead on his latest conquest. But with each ignored call, the foundation of his empire trembled just a little more. Emma leaned back in her chair, a sense of anticipation building in her chest. The pieces were in motion, the game afoot. And this time, she wasn't just a player, she was the grandmaster. "Your move, Blake," she said to the empty room, her voice carrying the weight of years of unspoken challenges. "Let's see if you can keep up." As the city hummed with nightlife below, Emma felt more alive than she had in years. The thrill of the coming battle coursed through her veins, a delicious mix of excitement and vindication. The woman Blake had dismissed as lacking ambition was about to show him just how wrong he'd been, and the world would be watching. She had been organizing Blake's files in his home office, a task she'd done countless times before. As she reached for a folder on the top shelf, a small, unmarked envelope fluttered to the ground. Curiosity piqued. Emma picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a hotel receipt and a handwritten note. "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait for our next business meeting." Emma's heart stopped. The room spun around her as the implications sank in. She clutched the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It can't be." But deep down, she knew. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the sudden business trips. It all made sense now. As if on cue, Blake's voice echoed from downstairs. "Emma, are you up there?" Quickly, she shoved the envelope back where she found it, her mind racing. As Blake's footsteps approached, Emma made a split-second decision that would alter the course of her life. "Coming, darling," she called out, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Blake appeared in the doorway, his smile easy and untroubled. "There you are, ready for dinner." Emma looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in years. She saw the man she loved, but also the man who had betrayed her. In that moment, something hardened within her. "Of course," she replied, a smile masking the turmoil beneath. "Just let me freshen up." As Blake turned to leave, Emma's gaze fell on his computer. An idea began to form, a seed of a plan that would grow into something far bigger than she could have imagined. "Actually," she called after him, "why don't you go ahead? I just remembered I need to send a quick email for the charity gala next week." Blake nodded, oblivious to the shift that had just occurred. "Don't be too long. You know how I hate cold food." As soon as he was gone, Emma's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing files she had never dared to touch before. With each click, each password breached, her resolve strengthened. "You want to play games, Blake?" she murmured, her eyes scanning the wealth of information before her. "Then let's play." In the weeks and months that followed, Emma became a silent gatherer of secrets, building her knowledge and her plan. She smiled and played the part of the devoted wife, all while preparing for the day she would reclaim her power. Now, 2 years later, as she sat in her apartment overlooking the city, Emma felt a mix of sadness and fierce determination. The pain of betrayal still stung, but it had forged her into something stronger, more resilient. She picked up her phone, dialing a number she knew by heart. "Jessica? It's Emma. I think it's time we had a little chat about our mutual friend, Blake Anderson." As she spoke, Emma's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. The game was changing, and she was about to introduce a wild card that would shake Blake's world to its core. The betrayed wife was gone, and in her place stood a woman ready to rewrite her own story, no matter the cost. His reverie was interrupted by the sharp buzz of his phone. Frowning, he picked it up to see a flurry of notifications from his executive team. With a sigh, he opened the first message. "Blake, we need to talk. Now, it's about Nexus Innovations." His brow furrowed. Nexus Innovations? The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. He dialed his CFO. "Tom, what's going on?" What's this about Nexus? Tom's voice crackled through the speaker, tense and worried. Blake, Nexus just acquired Macrotech. They came out of nowhere with an all-cash offer. The board couldn't refuse. Blake sat up straight, his mind racing. Macrotech was a key supplier vital to their supply chain. How the hell did this happen? Who's behind Nexus? That's the thing, Blake. We don't know. Their ownership structure is a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. But whoever they are, they're not just stopping at Macrotech. They're making moves on half a dozen other companies in our ecosystem. Blake's hand tightened around his phone. Find out everything you can about Nexus. I want to know who's behind this by morning. As he ended the call, a chill ran down his spine. Something about this felt personal, calculated. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city he thought he owned. For the first time in years, Blake felt a flicker of doubt. He'd made enemies over the years, stepped on toes to get where he was. But this felt different. His phone buzzed again. An email this time from an anonymous address. With a sense of foreboding, he opened it. Enjoying the view from the top. Blake, don't get too comfortable. The game is just beginning. Attached was a photo that made his blood run cold. It was Emma, his ex-wife, looking radiant and confident, shaking hands with the CEO of Macrotech. The timestamp was from 3 months ago. Blake's mind reeled. Emma? But how? She was never interested in the business world. She was just... And then it hit him. All those years, he'd underestimated her, dismissed her. While he was busy building his empire, she had been watching, learning, planning. He thought back to the divorce, to the calm in her eyes that he couldn't understand. Now it all made sense. "Oh, Emma," he whispered, a mix of admiration and fear in his voice. "What have you done?" As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, Blake Anderson realized that his world was about to be turned upside down. The chess pieces were moving, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one controlling the board. In her own apartment across town, Emma smiled as she imagined Blake's reaction. The first move had been made, and now the real game could begin. She raised a glass to the city lights, her eyes glinting with anticipation. "Your move, darling," she murmured. "Let's see if you're as clever as you always thought you were." Suddenly, the crowd parted, and there she was, Emma. His breath caught in his throat. She was radiant in a stunning emerald gown, her hair swept up elegantly. But it wasn't her beauty that made his heart race. It was what, or rather who, she was carrying. In her arms were 2 infants no more than a year old. Twins, a boy and a girl, their cherubic faces peeking out from designer baby wraps that matched Emma's gown perfectly. The room seemed to hush as Emma glided through the crowd, stopping to chat with CEOs and celebrities, all of whom cooed over the babies. Blake felt rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. Blake Anderson. A voice snapped him out of his trance. It was Richard Kensington, one of New York's most influential venture capitalists. "Richard, good to see you," Blake managed, his eyes still fixed on Emma. Richard followed his gaze and chuckled. "Ah, I see you've spotted the belle of the ball. Emma Chin, right? Your ex-wife." Blake nodded mutely. "Quite the stir she's causing," Richard continued. "Did you know about the children?" Blake shook his head, his mouth dry. No, I had no idea." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Really? The timing is interesting, don't you think? They look to be about a year old. And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't your divorce finalized just about 2 years ago?" Blake's mind was racing. The implications were staggering. Could they be his? As if sensing his gaze, Emma turned, her eyes locking with his across the room. A slow, enigmatic smile spread across her face. She whispered something to the socialite she was talking to, then began making her way towards Blake. His heart pounded as she approached. The babies gurgled happily, their eyes a striking shade of blue that Blake recognized all too well, looking around. Curiously, "Hello, Blake," Emma said softly, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "It's been a while." Blake struggled to find his voice. "Emma, who are these?" Emma's smile widened. "Oh, how rude of me. Let me introduce you. This is Sophia." She nodded to the girl. "And this is Ethan. They're quite the handful. But then again, their father always did like a challenge." The implication hung in the air between them. Blake felt the room spin. "Are they?" he began, unable to finish the question. Emma leaned in close, her perfume bringing back a flood of memories. "Wouldn't you like to know?" she whispered. Then louder, "It was lovely to see you, Blake. We must catch up soon. The children and I have a busy night ahead." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Blake staring after her, his world tilted on its axis. As Emma disappeared into the crowd, the twins peering over her shoulders, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of Emma's carefully orchestrated plan. In the taxi ride back to his hotel, Blake's mind raced with questions. How could he not have known? What else was Emma hiding? And most importantly, what was her endgame? One thing was certain: the woman he thought he knew, the woman he had underestimated for so long, was gone. In her place was a formidable opponent, one who held all the cards. And Blake Anderson, for the first time in his life, felt completely out of his depth. "What do you mean you can't trace it?" Blake's voice was sharp, his patience wearing thin. Jonathan Hawthorne, the firm's managing partner, leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Blake, we've been at this for weeks. Every lead we follow disappears into a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Whoever's behind this has covered their tracks masterfully." Blake slammed his fist on the mahogany table, causing the other executives to flinch. "It has to be her, Emma. She's the one pulling the strings." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Your ex-wife?" "Blake, with all due respect, Emma was a housewife. She has no experience in—" "You don't know her," Blake interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "None of you do. I made that mistake, and now—" He trailed off, the weight of his realization heavy on his shoulders. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. Blake turned to the window, his mind racing. How had he been so blind? Suddenly, the door burst open. Sarah, Blake's assistant, rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Anderson, we found something." All heads turned towards her as she hurriedly set up her laptop. "We've been digging into Emma's past, as you requested. It turns out, during your marriage, she was quietly taking online courses in business and finance from top universities. But that's not all." Sarah pulled up a series of documents on the screen. "She also attended numerous high-profile charity events and galas, often when you were too busy to go. Look at the guest lists." Blake's eyes widened as he scanned the names. CEOs, venture capitalists, tech moguls. All the power players in the industry were there. "She was networking," Blake whispered, realization dawning. "All those years, while I thought she was just playing the role of the supportive wife, she was building her own empire." Jonathan finished, his voice a mix of admiration and shock. Blake sank into a chair, his mind reeling. He thought back to all the times he'd dismissed Emma's opinions, the condescending way he'd explained business concepts to her. All along, she'd been absorbing everything, biding her time. "There's more," Sarah said hesitantly. "We found traces of large transfers from your personal accounts to offshore banks over the years, always just under the reporting threshold." Blake's head snapped up. "What? That's impossible. I never authorized." And then it hit him. The joint accounts. The power of attorney he'd given her years ago, thinking she'd never understand or use it. Emma had been siphoning funds right under his nose, using his own money to fund her secret ventures. A mix of emotions washed over Blake. Anger, betrayal, and underneath it all, a grudging respect. Emma had outplayed him at his own game. "She played the long game," Blake murmured, almost to himself. "While I was focused on the next deal, the next quarter, she was thinking years ahead." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Emma wasn't just a scorned wife out for revenge. She was a calculating businesswoman who had used every resource at her disposal, including Blake himself, to build something formidable. As the New York skyline darkened outside, Blake Anderson realized he was facing the fight of his life, and for the first time he wasn't sure he would come out on top. In her penthouse across town, Emma smiled as she received a notification on her phone. Blake had finally started digging. "Let the real games begin," she whispered, raising a glass to her reflection. The woman staring back at her was no longer in anyone's shadow. She was ready to step into the light and claim what was rightfully hers. "Mr. Anderson?" A gentle voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see Dr. Amelia Collins, the lead geneticist, approaching with a folder in her hands. Blake's mouth went dry. "You have the results?" Dr. Collins nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "We do. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Was he ready? Blake's mind raced back to the Met Gala, to Emma's enigmatic smile, to the piercing blue eyes of the twins that had haunted his dreams for weeks. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I need to know, doctor. Please." Dr. Collins opened the folder, her eyes scanning the contents. "Mr. Anderson, based on the samples provided, I can confirm with 99.9% certainty that you are the biological father of both children." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Blake stumbled back, grabbing onto the wall for support. They're mine," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes, Mr. Anderson. The twins, Sophia and Ethan, are your biological children." A tsunami of emotions crashed over Blake. Joy, fear, anger, confusion, all warring for dominance. He had children, twins, with Emma. But how? When? As if reading his thoughts, Dr. Collins continued gently. "Based on their estimated age, conception would have occurred approximately 2 years ago, just before your divorce proceedings began. And then it hit him. The last-ditch attempt to save their marriage. The passionate night that had felt like a goodbye. Emma had known. All this time she had known. "She never told me," Blake said, his voice cracking. "Why didn't she tell me?" Dr. Collins placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Anderson, I can't speak to the personal circumstances, but perhaps this is a conversation you need to have with your ex-wife." Blake nodded numbly, his mind reeling. As he left the facility, the bustling streets of New York seemed muted, distant. He had children. He was a father. And Emma had kept this from him, using their own flesh and blood as pawns in her elaborate game. Anger began to bubble up, mixing with the hurt and confusion. He pulled out his phone, dialing Emma's number with shaking fingers. It rang once, twice, and then her smooth voice came through. "Blake, what a pleasant surprise." "Cut the act, Emma," he growled. "I know about the twins. I know they're mine." There was a pause, and then Emma's tone shifted, becoming sharper, more focused. Well, took you long enough to figure it out. And here I thought you were supposed to be the clever one." "Why?" Blake demanded, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Oh, Blake," Emma sighed, a mix of pity and amusement in her voice. "You gave up the right to know when you decided your ambition was more important than our marriage. Besides, I needed to see what kind of man you really were. Would you care enough to dig, to find out the truth? Or would you be content to believe I had moved on, had a family with someone else?" Blake felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "They're my children, Emma. I had a right to know." "Rights?" Emma's voice turned cold. "Let's talk about rights, Blake. The right to be respected, to be seen as an equal partner. The right to not be betrayed. You forfeited a lot of rights when you decided to throw our marriage away." As Emma's words sank in, Blake realized the game had changed entirely. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal, deeply personal. And Emma held all the cards. "What do you want, Emma?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He could almost hear her smile through the phone. "Want? Oh, Blake, I don't want anything from you. I already have everything I need. The question is, what are you willing to do to be a part of your children's lives?" As the call ended, Blake stood in the middle of the sidewalk, oblivious to the bustling New Yorkers around him. He had underestimated Emma at every turn, and now he was facing the consequences. The twins weren't just leverage in Emma's game. They were a stark reminder of everything he had taken for granted, everything he stood to lose. For the first time in his life, Blake Anderson felt truly powerless. And as the reality of his situation sank in, he realized that the real battle, the fight for his children, for redemption, for a chance to right his wrongs, was only just beginning. "Mrs. Chun, your strategy for the Asian markets is brilliant," gushed a silver-haired CEO, his eyes alight with admiration. "How did you foresee the shift in consumer behavior so accurately?" Emma smiled enigmatically, years of practiced charm coming to the fore. "Sometimes the best view of the game is from the sidelines, Mr. Thornton. You'd be surprised what you can learn when people underestimate you." As she gracefully navigated through the crowd, Emma could feel the weight of countless gazes upon her. Gone was the shadow of Blake Anderson's wife. In her place stood a formidable businesswoman, a force to be reckoned with. "Emma, darling," called out Vivian Astor, the queen bee of New York's social scene. "You simply must tell us about your latest venture. I hear you've got half of Wall Street eating out of your hand." Emma laughed, a melodious sound that carried across the terrace. "Now, Vivian, you know a magician never reveals her secrets. But let's just say, I've learned from the best, and improved upon their methods." As the night wore on, Emma found herself in deep conversation with some of the most powerful players in the business world. Tech moguls, hedge fund managers, venture capitalists, all hanging on her every word, eager to gain her insight, her favor. "The key," she explained to a rapt audience, "is to see the connections that others miss. Every handshake, every casual conversation at events like these, they're all threads in a larger tapestry." A young entrepreneur leaned in, his eyes wide. "But how did you build your network so quickly? It's like you appeared out of nowhere." Emma's smile held a hint of steel. "Oh, I've been here all along, watching, listening, learning. While others were focused on the next big deal, I was playing the long game." As she spoke, Emma's mind drifted back to all the galas and charity events she had attended as Blake's wife. How he had dismissed them as frivolous, never realizing the wealth of connections and information being exchanged. His short-sightedness had been her greatest asset. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. Emma turned to see what had caused the stir, and her heart skipped a beat. There, at the entrance to the terrace, stood Blake Anderson himself, looking lost and out of place in a sea of people who had once fawned over him. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Emma could see the confusion, the hurt, and the dawning realization in Blake's gaze. She raised her glass in a subtle toast, her expression unreadable. As Blake began to make his way through the crowd towards her, Emma turned to her gathered audience. "If you'll excuse me, it seems an old acquaintance has arrived. Do enjoy the rest of your evening." With that, she glided across the terrace to meet Blake halfway, leaving a wake of whispers and speculative glances behind her. "Blake," she said coolly as they came face to face, "this is an unexpected surprise. I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list." Blake's jaw tightened. "We need to talk, Emma. About the children, about everything." Emma's expression softened for just a moment, a flicker of the woman she once was shining through. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the polished businesswoman. "Very well," she said, her voice low, "but not here. Meet me at the lighthouse in an hour. We wouldn't want to cause a scene, would we?" As Blake nodded and retreated, Emma turned back to the party, her mind racing. The game was entering a new phase, and she needed to be prepared for whatever Blake might throw her way. The pieces were set, the players in position. As the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, Emma Chun stood at the precipice of everything she had worked for. The next move would be crucial, and she was determined to stay 3 steps ahead. As she drew near, Blake's breath caught in his throat. Even now, after everything, she was breathtakingly beautiful. But it wasn't just her beauty that struck him. It was the aura of power and self-assurance that radiated from her. "I'm surprised you actually came," Emma said, her voice carrying on the wind. "I half expected you to send one of your lackeys." Blake swallowed hard, fighting to keep his voice steady. "This is between us, Emma. No lackeys, no lawyers. Just you and me." Emma's lips curved into a sardonic smile. "Is it, Blake? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you've just realized there's a we at all." The words stung, and Blake felt a surge of anger. "You kept my children from me, Emma. How could you do that?" "Your children?" Emma's eyes flashed dangerously. "Tell me, Blake, without the DNA test, would you have even considered the possibility? Or would you have continued on, blissfully unaware, while I raised them alone?" Blake opened his mouth to retort, but the words died on his lips. She was right, and they both knew it. Emma continued, her voice low and intense. "You want to know how I could do it? I learned from the best, Blake. You taught me that in business and in life, you have to seize every advantage, use every asset at your disposal." "They're not assets, Emma," Blake exploded. "They're our children. Now they're our children," Emma said, her tone biting. "Funny how that works, isn't it? When you thought I was just your supportive wife, you were content to let me handle all the family stuff while you built your empire. Well, guess what, Blake? I built my own." As her words sank in, Blake felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, and saw not the woman he had married, but a formidable opponent who had been playing him all along. "You've been planning this for years, haven't you?" he asked, realization dawning. "Even before the divorce." Emma's smile was cold. "I learned early on that to survive in your world, I had to be 3 steps ahead. Every time you underestimated me, every time you dismissed my ideas or talked down to me at a board meeting, I was watching, learning, planning." Blake's mind raced, piecing together all the subtle clues he had missed over the years. The quiet competence with which Emma had managed their household, the insightful questions she would ask about his business deals, the network of connections she had built while he was focused on the next acquisition. "So what now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's your endgame, Emma?" Emma stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. "My endgame? Oh, Blake, we're just getting started. You see, while you've been scrambling to figure out what's happening, I've been busy becoming your silent competitor. Every move you make, every deal you close, I'm right there, matching you step for step." Blake felt a chill run down his spine. "The Nexus Innovations acquisitions. Just the tip of the iceberg," Emma confirmed. "I know your playbook inside and out, Blake. I helped write it, remember? And now, I'm rewriting it." As the implications of her words sank in, Blake felt a mixture of fear and grudging admiration. Emma had outmaneuvered him at every turn, using his own tactics against him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Emma's expression softened slightly. "I want you to understand what it feels like to be underestimated, to be seen as nothing more than an accessory. And then, Blake, I want you to earn your place in our children's lives, not as the great Blake Anderson, but as a father who's willing to put in the work." As she turned to leave, Emma paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Blake, you might want to take a closer look at the San Francisco Business Council. I hear there's a new member who's shaking things up." With that, she walked away, leaving Blake standing alone in the moonlight, the sound of crashing waves mirroring the turmoil in his heart. He had always prided himself on being the smartest person in the room, the one who could see 10 moves ahead. But now, for the first time in his life, Blake Anderson realized he was playing catch-up, and the game was far from over. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice tight with barely contained anger. As if on cue, the door opened, and Emma glided in, the picture of poise and professionalism in a crisp navy suit. "Apologies for the delay, gentlemen," she said smoothly, taking her seat. "Traffic in Silicon Valley can be so unpredictable." Blake's jaw clenched. "What are you doing here, Emma?" Emma's smile was razor-sharp. "Why, I'm here as a major shareholder, of course. Didn't you get the memo?" The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Blake felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. You can't." "Oh, but I can." Emma interrupted, her voice cool and collected. And I have. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I believe it's time we discuss the future of Anderson Tech Solutions. Or should I say, the lack thereof. For the next hour, Emma laid out her plan with surgical precision. She detailed how she had quietly acquired a significant portion of the company's shares through a network of shell companies and silent partners. She presented data showing how Anderson Tech had been outmaneuvered in key markets, losing ground to more innovative competitors, many of which, Blake realized with growing horror, were subsidiaries of Emma's own conglomerate. As Emma spoke, Blake felt as if he were drowning, each revelation another wave crashing over him. He watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to grudging admiration, and finally to outright support for Emma's vision. "This is insanity," Blake finally exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "You can't just waltz in here and take over the company I built." Emma's eyes locked onto his, a mix of triumph and something else, regret, perhaps, swirling in their depths. "Can't I, Blake? Isn't that exactly what you taught me to do? To seize opportunities, to strike when your opponent is weakest." She stood, her presence commanding the room. "The fact is, Anderson Tech has been stagnating under your leadership. You've become complacent, too comfortable in your success. I'm offering a path forward, a way to revitalize this company and secure its future." The board members nodded in agreement, and Blake felt the last vestiges of control slipping away. He looked around the table, searching for allies, but found only averted gazes and uncomfortable silence. "This isn't over, Emma," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Emma's smile never wavered. "Oh, I think it is, Blake. But don't worry, I'm not here to destroy you. In fact, I have a proposition." She slid a folder across the table. Blake opened it with shaking hands, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. "A merger?" he whispered, disbelief coloring his tone. Emma nodded. "Your expertise combined with my innovation and market insight. Together, we could create something truly extraordinary." She paused, her voice softening slightly. "It's what we should have been doing all along, Blake. Partners in every sense of the word." For a moment, the years fell away, and Blake saw a glimpse of the woman he had fallen in love with, brilliant, ambitious, unstoppable. But now, instead of standing in his shadow, she was offering him a place by her side. The room held its breath, waiting for Blake's response. He looked up, meeting Emma's gaze, seeing the challenge there, and the opportunity. "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's expression hardened. "Then the hostile takeover proceeds as planned. Your choice, Blake, partner or adversary." As the weight of the decision pressed down on him, Blake realized that this moment would define not just his future, but the future of everything he had built. The game had changed, and Emma held all the cards. Now he had to decide, would he fold, or would he find a way to play this new hand? The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second feeling like an eternity. The future of Anderson Tech Solutions and the complex relationship between Blake and Emma hung in the balance, waiting for Blake's next move. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg, they all wanted the exclusive. The tale of the underestimated wife who transformed herself into a corporate powerhouse had captured the nation's imagination. "Ms. Chun," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Maria Santos from the Wall Street Journal is here for your follow-up interview." Emma smoothed her silk blouse, a small smile playing at her lips. "Send her in." Maria entered, recorder in hand, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Thank you for agreeing to meet again, Ms. Chun. The response to your story has been overwhelming." "Please call me Emma," she replied, gesturing to the plush chairs overlooking Central Park. "And yes, the response has been interesting." Maria leaned forward eagerly. "The public is fascinated by your journey. A woman who turned her husband's betrayal into motivation to build an empire. You've become a symbol of female empowerment overnight." Emma's laugh was soft but carried an edge. "Overnight? No, Maria. This was years in the making." Everyone sees the butterfly. Few care to understand the metamorphosis. Tell me about that metamorphosis, Maria pressed. What was the turning point? Emma's eyes grew distant, remembering. People assume it was the divorce or discovering Blake's infidelity. But the real turning point, it was much earlier. It was every boardroom meeting where my ideas were dismissed. Every patronizing explanation of basic business concepts I'd mastered years ago. Every time I was introduced as Blake's wife instead of my own person. She stood, walking to the window. I realized that in Blake's world, in most of their worlds, I was invisible. So I used that invisibility as a weapon. When no one's watching you, you can observe everything. Maria scribbled frantically. And now? How does it feel to be so visible? Emma turned, her expression fierce. It feels like vindication. But more than that, it feels like responsibility. Every young woman who's been underestimated, every person who's been told to stay in their lane, they're watching. And I intend to show them exactly what's possible. The interview continued, but Emma's mind drifted to the morning's other headlines. Blake had been spotted leaving a high-end jewelry store, looking haggard. The speculation was running wild. Was he trying to win her back? The thought almost made her laugh. One last question, Maria said, pulling Emma back to the present. What would you say to Blake Anderson now? Emma's smile was enigmatic. Nothing. I've said everything I needed to say through my actions. The question is he finally ready to listen? As Maria packed up her recorder, Emma's phone buzzed. A text from Blake. We need to talk. About everything. Please. She set the phone down without replying, turning back to the stunning view of Manhattan. The city stretched out before her, a concrete jungle she had learned to navigate and conquer. Somewhere out there, Blake was waiting for her response, probably pacing his office like a caged lion. Let him wait, she thought. She had waited years for her moment. Now the world was watching, and Emma Chun was just getting started. Ms. Chun? Her assistant's voice interrupted her thoughts. The twins' nanny called. They're asking for their bedtime story. Emma's expression softened. Tell her I'll be home in 20 minutes. Some things are more important than empire building. As she gathered her things, Emma caught her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her was neither Blake Anderson's ex-wife nor the business world's newest sensation. She was simply herself, mother, entrepreneur, survivor. And that, she realized, was her greatest victory of all. The city lights began to twinkle as dusk fell, and Emma Chun stepped into her waiting car, leaving the weight of the day's headlines behind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, she had a different role to play, one that no magazine cover could capture, and no business victory could match. Blake's hands trembled as he read through the article for the 10th time, each word another nail in his coffin. The reporter had been thorough, almost surgically precise, detailing years of his indiscretions, affairs, and questionable business practices. His phone buzzed incessantly, board members, investors, friends all demanding explanations. But one message caught his eye. Turn on CNBC. Now, with a sense of dread, Blake grabbed the remote. There, in pristine high definition, was Jessica Reynolds, his former mistress, being interviewed live. Yes, I was involved with Blake Anderson. Jessica's voice was clear and unwavering. But what people don't know is that it wasn't just me. There was a pattern, a systematic way he would target ambitious women in the industry, promising mentorship but delivering manipulation. Blake felt the blood drain from his face. Jessica continued, each word another twist of the knife. But the real story here isn't about Blake's infidelities. It's about Emma. She reached out to me after discovering the affair, but not for revenge. She wanted to understand, to learn from our experiences. She turned what could have been a devastating betrayal into an opportunity for growth and empowerment. The interviewer leaned forward. Are you saying Emma Chin used her husband's affairs to build her business network? Jessica smiled. Emma showed all of us, that we were worth more than being someone's secret. She helped many of us start our own companies, become independent. She turned victims into victors. Blake's phone rang, his PR team, no doubt scrambling to contain the damage. But before he could answer, the screen split to show a live feed from Silicon Valley. Emma was stepping out of her car, surrounded by reporters. "Mrs. Chun, your response to the Times article." Emma paused, adjusting her sunglasses. The camera caught the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "I believe the article speaks for itself. But I will say this: success is the best revenge, and helping other women succeed, that's justice." Blake slumped in his chair, the full weight of his actions crashing down on him. Every woman he had used and discarded had become a piece in Emma's chess game, a node in her network, a brick in the foundation of her empire. His office door burst open. Sarah, his assistant, rushed in, panic evident on her face. "Mr. Anderson, the board is calling an emergency meeting. Major shareholders are threatening to pull out. And there's more." "More," Blake croaked. "3 more women have come forward. They're scheduled to appear on Good Morning America tomorrow." Sarah hesitated. "And sir, they have emails, photos, evidence." Blake turned to the window, staring at his reflection in the darkened glass. The mighty Blake Anderson, brought low not by corporate raiders or market crashes, but by his own arrogance and betrayals. His phone buzzed again, another message from Emma. "The twins asked about you this morning. They wanted to know why people were saying mean things about their daddy on TV." "What should I tell them, Blake?" That message, more than anything else, broke him. He had lost not just his reputation and potentially his company, but the respect of his children he was only beginning to know. With shaking fingers, he typed back, Tell them their daddy made mistakes. Big ones. But he's going to try to make things right." Emma's response came swiftly. "Actions speak louder than words, Blake. They always have." As the sun rose over New York City, Blake Anderson faced the ruins of his carefully constructed world. The king had been dethroned, his pieces scattered across the board. And somewhere across the country, Emma Chun was just beginning her day, her position stronger than ever. The game wasn't over, but the rules had changed irrevocably. And Blake was finally learning what it felt like to be the one without power, without control, to be the one fighting for redemption in a world that had already judged him guilty. "The final documents are ready," Jessica announced, placing a sleek folder on Emma's desk. "Everything Blake ever told me, every deal he discussed during our time together. It's all there." Emma looked up from her laptop, studying the woman before her. "You didn't have to do this, Jessica. Your testimony was enough." Jessica sank into the plush chair across from Emma, her expression serious. "No, I needed to do this. For myself, for all the others, and..." She paused. "For you. You could have destroyed me when you found out about the affair. But instead, you showed me a different path." Emma stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hollywood Hills. "Do you remember that day? When I confronted you?" Jessica laughed softly. "How could I forget? I expected screaming, threats, maybe even a scene. Instead, you sat down, ordered coffee, and asked me about my career goals. Because I saw myself in you." Emma turned, her eyes intense. "Talented, ambitious, but playing by men's rules in a man's world. I knew there had to be a better way." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's phone buzzing. A news alert flashed across the screen. "Anderson tech stocks plummet as scandal deepens." Jessica moved to stand beside Emma, both women watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "He never saw it coming, did he? Any of it?" "No." Emma's voice was quiet. Blake's greatest weakness was always his certainty that he was the smartest person in the room. He never imagined that his discarded pieces would come together to form a stronger whole. Jessica touched Emma's arm gently. "The other women, they're ready. Sarah from his London office, Maria from Tokyo, even that young intern from 3 years ago. They all want to tell their stories." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what they were about to unleash. "It's not about revenge anymore, Jessica. It's about change. Real, lasting change." "I know," Jessica nodded. "That's why we're all here. You showed us we could be more than victims or accessories. We could be warriors. Emma's phone buzzed again. A text from Blake. Please, the children. We need to talk. Jessica caught a glimpse of the message. Are you going to meet with him? Eventually, Emma replied, her voice firm. But first, he needs to understand what it feels like to be powerless, to have your voice silenced, your worth questioned. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most necessary ones. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the hills, Emma turned to Jessica with a determined smile. Ready for phase 2? Jessica straightened her shoulders, her expression matching Emma's resolve. Ready. The press conference is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Every major network will be there. Good. Emma picked up the folder from her desk. It's time to show the world that the old boys club isn't the only game in town anymore. As Jessica left the office, Emma remained at the window, watching the city lights begin to twinkle. In her reflection, she saw not just herself, but all the women who had been underestimated, overlooked, and betrayed. Tomorrow, their collective voice would shake the foundations of Silicon Valley and beyond. Your move, Blake, she whispered to the gathering darkness. But this time, you're not playing against just me. You're playing against all of us. The night stretched out before her, full of possibility and promise. Emma Chun had transformed from a single player into a general, leading an army of empowered women ready to reshape the corporate landscape. And somewhere in New York, Blake Anderson was about to learn that his greatest mistake wasn't just betraying his wife. It was underestimating the power of women united in purpose. His phone lit up with a notification. Breaking. Women's Empowerment Fund launched by Emma Chun, former Anderson Tech employees among first beneficiaries. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. Of course, Emma wasn't just destroying him. She was building something new from the ashes of his empire. Mr. Anderson? Blake looked up to see Sarah, his former assistant, standing before him. She looked different now, confident, polished, no longer the timid girl who had fetched his coffee and kept his secrets. Sarah, he acknowledged, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. I suppose you're here to twist the knife too? She sat down, smoothing her designer suit. Chanel, he noticed, the kind of suit he used to buy for Emma. Actually, I'm here to offer you a chance at redemption, Sarah said, her voice steady. Emma sent me. Blake's hand tightened around his glass. Redemption? After what she's done. After what you did, Sarah corrected firmly. But this isn't about blame anymore. It's about change. She pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. On the screen was a document titled Project Phoenix, Corporate Culture Reform Initiative. What is this? Blake asked, scanning the contents. A way forward, Sarah explained. Emma's offering you a position on the board of the Women's Empowerment Fund. Not as a figurehead, but as someone who's seen both sides, the old way and the new way. Blake's laugh was hollow. She wants me to help dismantle the very system I helped build? No. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes intense. She wants you to help build something better. For your children, Blake. For Sophia and Ethan. The mention of his twins hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't seen them in weeks, not since the scandal broke. Why? He whispered. Why would Emma offer this? Because she remembers who you were before power corrupted you, Sarah replied softly. The brilliant student at Stanford who wanted to change the world. The man who saw potential in a young Emma Chun. She believes that man is still in there somewhere. Blake stared out the window at the Manhattan skyline, remembering simpler times. And if I refuse? Then the next wave of revelations hits tomorrow morning, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Emma has enough material to keep the story running for months. But that's not what she wants. What does she want? Growth, change, evolution. Sarah stood, straightening her jacket. The press conference is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Emma will announce the initiative with or without you. But imagine the message it would send if Blake Anderson, the poster child of toxic corporate culture, stood up and admitted he was wrong. If he committed to being part of the solution. She placed a business card on the table. The choice is yours. But remember, your children are watching. What kind of legacy do you want to leave them? As Sarah walked away, Blake picked up the card. It was blank except for a single line. The greatest power lies in admitting our weaknesses. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow. Blake Anderson sat alone, facing the hardest decision of his life. The old way was crumbling, and Emma had offered him a chance to be part of building the new. His phone buzzed one final time, a photo from Emma, the twins at their piano recital, beaming at the camera. Below it, a simple message: "They still ask about you every day. Don't let them down again." Blake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years of mistakes pressing down on him. Tomorrow would bring either his final fall or the beginning of his redemption. The choice, as it had always been, was his to make. "Good morning," Emma began, her voice clear and strong. "We're here today to announce something unprecedented in corporate America. But first, I'd like to share a story." The crowd leaned forward, hanging on her every word. 10 years ago, I sat in a boardroom, watching my ideas being dismissed and credited to others. I was told to be grateful for my seat at the table, even if I wasn't allowed to speak at it. She paused, letting the words sink in. Many of you know what happened next, the betrayals, the divorce, the scandal. But what you don't know is what happened behind the scenes. Suddenly, movement at the side of the stage caught everyone's attention. Gasps rippled through the audience as Blake Anderson emerged from the wings, looking both determined and humbled. Emma's expression remained neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen, Blake Anderson." Blake approached the podium, the weight of hundreds of judgmental stares pressing down on him. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and started again. "I spent years building what I thought was success, but I built it on a foundation of privilege, arrogance, and the systematic suppression of voices that deserved to be heard." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "My greatest mistake wasn't the affairs or the corporate misconduct. It was believing that power meant never having to listen, never having to change." He turned to Emma, their eyes meeting for the first time in months. "I lost everything because I couldn't see the extraordinary woman standing right beside me." Emma's composure wavered slightly, a flicker of emotion crossing her face. "Today," Blake continued, "I'm here not to ask for forgiveness, but to announce my commitment to change. I'm pledging my remaining assets, approximately $2.3 billion, to the Women's Empowerment Fund. And I'm stepping down from all my remaining board positions to focus on corporate culture reform." The audience erupted in murmurs and gasps. Emma stepped forward. "The fund isn't just about money. It's about mentorship, about creating opportunities, about ensuring that no voice goes unheard. And yes, it's about redemption, not just for Blake, but for an entire system that needs to evolve." From the front row, two small figures suddenly broke protocol and ran onto the stage. Sophia and Ethan, dressed in matching outfits, wrapped their arms around both Emma and Blake. The cameras went wild, capturing the moment that would grace tomorrow's headlines. The family reunited, but on entirely new terms. "Daddy, you did good," Sophia whispered, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, causing gentle laughter to ripple through the crowd. Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "This is what change looks like," she said to the audience. "It's not just about tearing down the old way. It's about building something better, together." Blake knelt down to his children's level, then looked up at Emma. "I understand now," he said softly. "Success isn't about power over others. It's about empowering others to succeed." As the applause thundered through the auditorium, Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders. This wasn't the ending she had originally planned, it was better. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her revenge into revolution. Later, as the family walked off stage together, Ethan tugged at both his parents' hands. "Does this mean we can all have dinner together sometimes?" Emma and Blake exchanged glances, years of hurt and healing passing between them in a single moment. "Yes," Emma replied, squeezing her son's hand. "But with new rules, right, Blake?" Blake nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. New rules, he agreed. And this time, everyone gets a voice at the table. The future stretched out before them, not as adversaries or victims, but as partners in creating lasting change. The game was over, but the real work, the work of transformation, was just beginning. Emma stood at the edge of the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Her phone buzzed with a text from Blake. Board meeting ran late. On my way with the kids. Save me some champagne. She smiled, remembering how different things had been just a year ago. The sound of heels clicking on the terrace drew her attention. Quite a view, isn't it? Jessica Reynolds appeared beside her, now the fund's director of mentorship programs. Both literally and metaphorically, Emma agreed, gesturing at the gathering. Former rivals turned allies, victims turned leaders, all mingling and celebrating their shared success. Sarah approached, carrying 3 glasses of champagne. The latest numbers just came in, she announced, handing them each a glass. The Anderson Corporate Reform Initiative has been adopted by 70% of Fortune 500 companies. To change, Jessica raised her glass. To voices being heard, Sarah added. To unexpected endings, Emma finished. Just as the elevator doors opened, Blake stepped out, Sophia and Ethan racing ahead of him. The twins, now 7, had grown so much in the past year. Sophia immediately ran to her mother, while Ethan made a beeline for the dessert table. Sorry I'm late, Blake said, joining their circle. The past year had changed him too. Gone was the arrogant CEO, replaced by someone more thoughtful, more aware. You're just in time, Emma replied. We were about to announce the next phase. Blake raised an eyebrow. Already? Some things never change. You're still always 3 steps ahead. Actually, Emma smiled. This one was your idea. Remember that conversation about international expansion? The Global Women's Leadership Summit? Blake's eyes widened. You're really doing it? We're really doing it, Sarah confirmed. 20 countries, 5 continents. Emma's keynote is already being called the most anticipated speech of the decade. The party continued around them, but Emma found herself drawn back to the view. Blake joined her, maintaining the comfortable distance they'd established over the past year. Do you ever wonder, he asked quietly, what would have happened if I hadn't been such a fool? Emma considered his question. Everything happened exactly as it needed to. Sometimes the wrong path leads you to the right destination. Mom, Dad, Sophia called out. Come look at what I drew. They turned to see their daughter proudly displaying a crayon drawing of their family. Emma at a podium, Blake teaching a class, and the twins in the center, all holding hands. It's for the new office, Sophia explained, so everyone can see that change starts at home. Emma felt tears prick her eyes as she knelt beside her daughter. It's perfect, sweetheart. Blake joined them, placing a gentle hand on Sophia's shoulder. You know what? That should be our new logo. The great Blake Anderson. Taking design advice from a 7-year-old? Emma teased. Now that's what I call progress. The laughter that followed was genuine. Healing. As the sky darkened and the city lights began to twinkle, Emma looked around at her transformed world. The pain of betrayal had birthed something extraordinary. Not just a business empire, but a movement. Not just revenge, but revolution. Time for cake, Ethan announced, breaking the moment. As they gathered around the elaborate dessert table, Emma caught Blake's eye. There was understanding there, respect, and something else, gratitude, perhaps, for the harsh lessons that had made them both better people. To the future, Blake raised his glass. To the future, everyone echoed. And as the New York skyline sparkled behind them, Emma Chun realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from transforming them into allies. The game had evolved into something far more meaningful than winning or losing. It had become about changing the rules for everyone. The story of Emma and Blake wasn't over. It had simply entered a new chapter. And this time, everyone's voice would be heard in the telling. You've got this? Blake's voice came from behind her. He stood a respectful distance away, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and something deeper, unspoken. Emma nodded, grateful for his presence. It's not just me up there today. It's all of us, every woman who's ever been silenced, every dream that's been deferred. Mom! Sophia's excited whisper caught their attention. She and Ethan peeked around the curtain, their eyes wide with awe at the gathering crowd. Remember, Ethan said solemnly, if you get nervous, just imagine everyone in their underwear. A laugh bubbled up from Emma's chest, releasing some of the tension. I'll keep that in mind, sweetheart. The stage manager approached. 2 minutes, Mrs. Chun. As Emma prepared to step out, Blake caught her hand. Emma, He hesitated, years of unspoken words hanging between them. She squeezed his hand gently. I know, Blake. We've come a long way. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world fell away. They weren't ex-spouses or business partners, but two people who had traversed a difficult path to reach this point. Break a leg, Blake said softly, releasing her hand. Emma stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. As her eyes adjusted, she saw the sea of faces, women and men from every nation, all there to be part of this historic moment. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice strong and clear, we stand at a crossroads in history. For too long, half of the world's population has been underrepresented, underestimated, and unheard. Today, we change that narrative. As she spoke, Emma felt the weight of every struggle, every setback, every triumph that had led to this moment. She shared stories of women breaking barriers in tech, finance, and politics. She spoke of the men who had become allies in the fight for equality. But our work is far from over, she continued, her passion evident in every word. True change requires more than just policies and programs. It requires a fundamental shift in how we see and value each other. From the wings, Blake watched with a mixture of admiration and regret. He saw not just the powerful leader Emma had become, but glimpses of the young woman he had fallen in love with years ago. Brilliant, determined, unstoppable. As Emma's speech reached its crescendo, she paused, her eyes scanning the audience. I stand before you not as a victim who overcame, nor as a woman who succeeded despite the odds. I stand here as living proof that when we lift each other up, when we amplify each other's voices, we all rise together. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Emma blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the response. As she made her way off stage, she was engulfed in a group hug by Sophia and Ethan. You were amazing, Mom, they chorused. Blake stood nearby, his eyes shining with unshed tears. You've changed the world, Emma, he said softly. Emma looked at him, then at their children, then back at the still cheering crowd. No, she replied. We're changing it together. As they made their way through the corridors, surrounded by well-wishers and media, Emma felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with betrayal and heartbreak had led to this, a movement that transcended personal vendettas and corporate warfare. Later that evening, as New York City glittered below their hotel suite, Emma stood on the balcony, reflecting on the day's events. Blake joined her, maintaining the careful distance they'd cultivated. What's next? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Emma smiled, her eyes fixed on the horizon. You know me, Blake. I'm always 3 steps ahead. As the cool night air swirled around them, both felt the subtle shift in their dynamic. They weren't just co-parents or business partners anymore. They were two people who had walked through fire and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together, yet apart. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. And for the first time in years, both Emma and Blake felt truly, deeply aligned in their purpose. The game had evolved, and so had they. Whatever came next, they would face it with the hard-won wisdom of their shared past and the hope of a brighter future for their children and for the world. She stood in the spacious kitchen of her San Francisco home, surrounded by a whirlwind of activity. Caterers bustled about, decorators hung streamers, and in the midst of it all, 12-year-old Sophia and Ethan argued over the playlist for the evening's party. "Mom!" Sophia called out, exasperation clear in her voice. "Ethan wants to play his weird techno music. It's our graduation party, not a rave." Emma suppressed a smile. "How about a compromise? Half your choices, half Ethan's." Ethan rolled his eyes in a perfect imitation of his father. "Fine, but I get to pick the first song." As the twins resumed their bickering, albeit more playfully now, Emma felt a familiar presence behind her. "Looks like World War III in here," Blake commented, setting down a large gift-wrapped box. "More like negotiating a peace treaty between two superpowers," Emma replied, turning to face him. "Thanks for coming early to help." Blake's eyes crinkled with amusement. "And missed the pre-party drama? Not a chance." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years seemed to fall away. They had come so far from the bitter enemies they once were, forging a new kind of relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "Can you believe they're graduating elementary school already?" Emma mused, her voice soft with nostalgia. "It feels like yesterday we were changing diapers and arguing over custody arrangements." Blake nodded, his expression turning serious. "Emma, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." Before he could continue, the doorbell rang, followed by excited squeals from the twins. "They're here!" Sophia shouted, racing to the door with Ethan hot on her heels. A group of children poured in, filling the house with laughter and chatter. Emma and Blake found themselves swept up in the chaos of preteens, pizza, and party games. Hours later, as the last of the guests departed and the twins disappeared upstairs with their haul of presents, Emma and Blake stood on the back patio, watching the sun set over the bay. "You were saying earlier?" Emma prompted, remembering Blake's unfinished thought. Blake took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position with the UN's Global Education Initiative. It would mean relocating to Geneva for at least a year." Emma felt a sudden tightness in her chest. "Oh," she managed, trying to keep her voice neutral. "That's quite an opportunity." "It is," Blake agreed. "But I wanted to discuss it with you first." The twins, they're at a critical age. And with everything we've built here, Emma turned to face him fully. "Blake, this is exactly the kind of work you've been passionate about since the reform. You can't pass it up." "But what about the kids? What about?" He hesitated, gesturing vaguely between them. "This?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "This?" Blake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she remembered well. "Us, Emma. This co-parenting, co-leading, whatever it is we've been doing. It works. I don't want to jeopardize it." Emma felt a surge of emotions, pride in Blake's growth, fear of disrupting their carefully balanced lives, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. "We'll make it work," she said firmly. "The kids can split their time between here and Geneva. It'll be an incredible experience for them. And as for us," she trailed off, the unspoken possibilities hanging in the air between them. Blake stepped closer, his voice low. "Emma, these past few years, working alongside you, seeing the woman you've become, I've realized something." Emma's heart raced. "Blake, don't." "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just need you to know that Mom, Dad." Ethan's voice shattered the moment. "You've got to see what Aunt Jessica got us." As they turned to go inside, Blake caught Emma's hand. "We'll talk more later?" Emma nodded, her mind whirling. She watched as Blake went to join the twins, his laugh mingling with theirs. Standing alone on the patio, Emma Chin faced yet another crossroads. The empire she had built, the family she had protected, the delicate balance she had maintained, all stood on the brink of change once again. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Emma took a deep breath. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. The greatest adventures often began with a leap into the unknown. With a small smile, she turned and walked into the house, ready to face whatever the future held, not as a conqueror or a victim, but as a woman fully in command of her own destiny. As she emerged into the main terminal, she spotted Blake waiting, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. The sight of him, relaxed in casual clothes, a far cry from his former corporate armor, made her breath catch. "Welcome to Switzerland," he said warmly, handing her the flowers. "Thank you," Emma replied, inhaling their sweet scent. "Blake, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "Besides, the kids insisted I make a good impression. Apparently, they think I've gone full embarrassing dad mode here." Emma laughed, feeling some of the tension dissipate. "Well, let's see if they're right." As they drove through the picturesque Swiss countryside, Emma found herself studying Blake's profile. He seemed different here, more at ease, as if the weight of their complicated past had finally begun to lift. "How's the project going?" she asked, genuinely curious about his work with the UN. Blake's eyes lit up. "It's incredible, Emma. We're making real progress on global education initiatives. I feel like I'm finally using my skills for something meaningful." "I'm happy for you," Emma said softly, surprised to find she truly meant it. They arrived at a charming chalet nestled in the mountains. As they stepped out of the car, the front door burst open, and Sophia and Ethan came running out. "Mom!" they cried in unison, enveloping Emma in a tight hug. "We have so much to show you," Sophia exclaimed. "Yeah. Wait till you see the view from the hiking trail," Ethan added. As the twins chattered excitedly, leading her into the house, Emma caught Blake's eye. He was watching them with a mixture of joy and something else, longing. Perhaps, later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emma and Blake sat on the balcony, sipping wine and gazing at the star-studded sky. "I've missed this," Blake said quietly. "The four of us together." Emma nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "The kids seem so happy here." "They are," Blake agreed. "But they miss you. We all do." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Emma turned to face him, her heart pounding. "Blake, what are we doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He set down his wine glass, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't know, Emma, but I do know that these past 6 months have made me realize something." "What's that?" she breathed, both dreading and anticipating his answer. "That I was a fool to ever let you go," Blake said, his voice thick with emotion. "That the man I've become, the father I am, it's all because of you. Because you had the strength to break us apart and the wisdom to help put me back together." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Blake, we can't just—" "I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted, echoing his words from months ago. "I just need you to know that I see you, Emma, the real you, and I'm in awe of the woman you've become." A silence fell between them, filled with years of history, pain, growth, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Finally, Emma spoke. "We've worked so hard to get where we are. Co-parents, partners in the foundation. I don't want to risk that." Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Neither do I. But Emma, don't you think we owe it to ourselves, to the kids, to explore what this could be?" As if on cue, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Emma closed her eyes, making a silent wish. When she opened them, Blake was watching her, patient and steady. In that moment, Emma Chun, the woman who had brought corporate giants to their knees and reshaped the global business landscape, felt like she was standing on the edge of her greatest adventure yet. "I don't have all the answers," she said softly, "but maybe we can figure it out together." Blake's smile was radiant as he reached for her hand. As their fingers intertwined, Emma felt a surge of excitement and fear. The future was unwritten, full of possibilities and potential pitfalls. But for the first time in years, she was ready to face it not as a conqueror or a victim, but as a partner. The Swiss mountains loomed in the darkness, silent witnesses to the beginning of a new chapter. Whatever came next, Emma knew one thing for certain: the greatest love stories were often the ones that took the longest to write. A gentle knock on the door pulled her from her reverie. "Come in," she called, turning to see Jessica enter, a tablet in hand. "The final numbers for the quarter are in," Jessica announced, her excitement palpable. "Emma, we've exceeded all projections. The Women's Empowerment Fund is now the largest of its kind globally. Emma smiled, pride swelling in her chest. That's incredible news, Jess. We should celebrate with the team. Jessica hesitated, her expression turning serious. There's something else. The board is pushing for expansion into emerging markets. They want to capitalize on our momentum. Emma's brow furrowed. That would mean more travel, more time away from... She stopped herself, but Jessica caught the implication. From Blake and the kids? Jessica finished gently. Emma, it's okay to admit that things have changed. We've all seen it. Emma sighed, sinking into her chair. Is it that obvious? Jessica laughed softly. Only to those of us who know you best. So, what's holding you back? Before Emma could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from Blake. Big news. Can we talk tonight? Her heart raced as she typed a quick reply. Of course. Everything okay? Blake's response was immediate. More than okay. See you at home. Emma looked up to find Jessica watching her, a knowing smile on her face. Go, Jessica said. The Empire will still be here tomorrow. As Emma drove home, her mind whirled with possibilities. What was Blake's news? And more importantly, why did it fill her with equal parts excitement and terror? She arrived at the house to find it unusually quiet. Hello? She called out, setting down her keys. Out here. Blake's voice came from the backyard. Emma stepped onto the patio and gasped. The entire space had been transformed. Twinkling lights hung from the trees, and in the center stood a small table set for two, complete with candles and a bottle of champagne. Blake emerged from the shadows, looking nervous but determined. I hope this isn't too much, he said softly. Blake, what is all this? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took her hand, leading her to the table. I got some news today. The UN wants to expand the education initiative globally. They've asked me to lead the charge. Emma felt her heart sink. Oh, so you'll be staying in Geneva longer? Blake shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. No, Emma. I turned it down. What? But Blake, this is your dream job. Why would you... Because my dream changed, he interrupted gently. Emma, these past few months have shown me what really matters. The kids, our work here with the foundation, and us. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Us. Blake took both her hands in his. I know we've been taking things slow, trying to figure out what this new dynamic means. But I realized something. I don't want to be cautious anymore. I want all in, Emma. With you, with our family, with the life we've built. Tears pricked at Emma's eyes. Blake, Wait, he said, reaching into his pocket. There's more. He pulled out a small velvet box, and Emma's heart nearly stopped. This isn't a proposal, Blake clarified quickly. Not yet, anyway. It's a promise. He opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring. A promise that whatever comes next, we face it together. Partners in every sense of the word. Emma stared at the ring, then at Blake, her mind reeling. All the doubts, the fears, the carefully constructed walls she had built over the years seemed to crumble in that moment. The board wants me to expand into emerging markets, she blurted out. It would mean more travel, more time away. Blake's smile never wavered. Then we'll make it work. Together. The kids are old enough for some adventure. Don't you think? Emma laughed, tears spilling down her cheeks. You really mean it, don't you? You're all in. All in, Blake confirmed, his eyes shining with emotion. So, what do you say, Emma-chan? Are you ready for our next great adventure? As the stars twinkled overhead and the distant sound of the bay lapped at the shore, Emma felt a lifetime of moments converge. The bitter betrayals, the hard-won victories, the cautious reconciliation. All of it had led to this. With a deep breath, she made her choice. Yes, she whispered, her voice growing stronger. Yes, I'm all in. As Blake slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma felt a sense of completion she had never known before. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning, a new chapter in a story that had taken the most unexpected and beautiful turn. The future stretched out before them, filled with promise and possibility. And for the first time in years, Emma-chan was ready to face it not as a conqueror or a survivor, but as one half of a whole, a partnership forged in fire and tempered by time, stronger and more resilient than ever before. "Mom! Dad! Look at this!" Sophia called out, holding up an intricately patterned scarf. At 14, she had blossomed into a confident young woman, her eyes sparkling with curiosity about the world around her. Ethan, never far behind his twin, was haggling with a vendor over a set of carved wooden elephants. "I think I'm getting the hang of this negotiation thing," he grinned, looking to Blake for approval. Blake ruffled his son's hair proudly. "Just remember, it's not always about getting the best deal. It's about mutual respect." Emma watched the scene unfold, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. The past year had been a whirlwind of change, expanding the Women's Empowerment Fund into India, navigating their rekindled relationship, and embarking on this family adventure around the world. As they made their way back to their hotel, Emma's phone buzzed. It was Jessica, calling from San Francisco. "Emma, we've got a situation." Jessica's voice was tense. "The Mumbai partnership is falling through. They're claiming we don't understand the local market." Emma's stomach dropped. This partnership was crucial for their expansion into South Asia. What happened? Cultural misunderstanding, it seems. They feel we're imposing Western ideals without considering local traditions. Blake, sensing Emma's distress, gently took the phone. "Jess, it's Blake. Can you set up an emergency meeting with their board? We'll be there." After ending the call, Blake turned to Emma, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll fix this together." Emma nodded, grateful for his support. "But the kids' tour of the Taj Mahal is tomorrow. We promised." "Go," Blake said softly. "Take them. I'll handle the meeting." Emma hesitated. This was her project, her responsibility. But as she looked at Sophia and Ethan, eagerly discussing the next day's plans, she realized something important. "No," she said firmly. "We'll both go to the meeting, and we'll bring the kids." Blake raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What are you thinking? That maybe we've been approaching this all wrong. We're not just business partners or philanthropical organizations. We're families trying to build a better future together." The next morning, instead of touring the Taj Mahal, the Anderson family found themselves in a sleek boardroom, facing skeptical executives of the Mumbai Women's Business Collective. Mrs. Chan, Mr. Anderson, the lead,